They come into conjunction and drift apart and come back together sometimes. And you notice that this star does that. It appears in the west, and the Magi read from this conjunction that a great event is to occur in human life. Their inner star speaks to them because they see the outer star, that a great personage is to be born in Israel, the Messiah whom their ancestors have taught them to expect, and whose message the Druids have carried off to Wales. They read that happens. They all get it at once, simultaneously. If only one of them had gotten it, they probably wouldn't have made the journey. But they all got it, and for 3 people to get it, well, if you can believe 2 witnesses, how about 3? And coming from their separate places of meditation, they came together and discussed this and said, did that happen to you too? Did you get that message? I did. Well, they go out and they sell everything they've got and they take off on this long trip. And it's a long trip. From Medea to Palestine is about 1,500 miles. It's a long ways. And traveling, it takes them nearly a year to make that journey. The Magi came a year after the birth of Jesus. You notice that in this story, Jesus and Mary are in a house. On the night of Christmas, day of birth, they're in a cave. And they stayed in Bethlehem for a while. They're still in this house. The only reason they left Bethlehem, went back to Nazareth, as we see from this, is because old King Herod's going to stir up trouble here. And they leave Bethlehem and go down to Egypt and stay there until Herod dies, and then they go back to Nazareth and find out. But these Magi see the star. And they arrive in Jerusalem following the star. And they realize that somewhere here, and I don't know why it is they don't know the Scripture. That's very curious. Maybe they do. They probably do. But they decide, well, let's see, we're at Stanford University. Now we might as well ask the professors. So they do. They ask the professors, the scribes and the learned ones of Israel, tell us, where is the Messiah to be born? And they get the answer, Bethlehem. Bethlehem means the house of bread. It's curious in terms of communion, isn't it? House of bread. And they go down to the house of bread, and as they come into town, on the evening of that day, the sun sets, and lo and behold, the star has returned. The conjunction has reformed. And it's setting in the west, and it seems to stand right over this particular house. So following it, they go in and greet the child who is born as the Messiah. Well, it's quite a story, you know. And there's a lot involved in it. It's really magic. And it's reserved for today, which is the last day of Christmas. 12 days of Christmas, right? This is the last one. This is the day of gift giving, by the way, you know. Proper time. Because, of course, this is the day that the Magi come and give gifts to the Messiah. And so, it's the day when the people originally exchanged gifts with each other, because the Magi did that. A year, however. Each day stands for a month. A year after the birth of Jesus, they came to perform their magic for him. And it is the day of Epiphany. Epiphino, manifestation. The shining forth. Shining forth of what? Shining forth of the divinity through the inner window of Viracocha. The tiny hiding star in the depth of one's being. One other piece of magic I noticed on television the other day was sometimes I like to watch Star Trek, even the second generation. And there was a replay of the one about the doctor. There's a feminine doctor in the second generation, and she gets trapped in a bubble, a time warp bubble, and it's collapsing on her. And her son is the only one who can get her back by concentrating inside of himself and opening up a window, a portal, through which she can jump. And of course, at the last moment, she managed to jump through this portal and come out of her space bubble back into the right proper time. And all of that would have been considered bah humbug nonsense before we discovered that such things are possible. And indeed they are. And when it's played off in those Star Trek movies, they don't get that from the Bible, you know. They get that from physics, especially quantum physics, quantum leap. Well, anyway, this leap through this window is, of course, that same portal of the star. The place where the appearance, out of nowhere, suddenly, something comes. That's the way God appears in human life. Suddenly, out of nowhere, there it is. And that out of nowhere is right from in here, coming right out through all of your senses and appearing before you in the world. Epiphino, epiphany, manifestation, the appearance of the divine in the human world. And all of us live in the hope of it. All of us are able to deal with the imminent fact of our own death because of it. All of us are able to have hope against every reason for despair because of it. We all know it can happen because it's almost ready to happen all the time. It's the ultimate gift, you see. And if you get that gift, well, everything else pales into insignificance. And if you could give that gift, well, you would truly be regarded by the receiver as the most blessed one. And that's the message, you see, of what it's all about. And the Messiah, well, the Messiah is one who stands ready to help you get that gift. And that's all. Out of the house of bread, here. Quantum leap. Into the world of the divine. Suddenly, there you are. And the message of the Messiah is, well, you'll probably do that when you die anyway, but why wait? Well, how do you feel about that? Messiahs and Magi's.
Charlie, I heard a story just before Christmas time of a man who experienced death in a heart attack situation, and he said there was this huge light that he was going to, and as he was going there, his body disintegrated into a tiny little light, and this big light was love, and he was just going to become part of it. He said it was just an incredible feeling, and he knew that his tiny spot was going to become part of the big one.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, he came back. It was hard coming back, but he was happy to be back after he realized that's out there. He's not afraid of death anymore.
That happened to me when I was 5. That's why I do what I do, because I had that experience at the age of 5. And I've talked to a lot of other people who've had it. And so therefore I know that whatever it may mean, it's a common human experience, and it feels just like that. That's why I understand that the ultimate motivator of human conduct is ecstasy, and ecstasy is that fusion between the little star and the big one. Yes?
Yes, sir. Would you please relate your experience at 5?
Yes, okay. It was at Christmas. It's my Christmas story. It's why Epiphany means something to me. When I was 5 years old, I was a victim of malpractice. And we didn't sue people for malpractice in those days. But if it were these days, he probably would have gotten sued. He was a strange name. The doctor's name was Bilderback. And he didn't build my back too well, but it wasn't my back that he operated on. It was my tonsils. Simple matter, you know, taking out tonsils. They used to do that. And I'd never been sick a day in my life. I was the healthiest kid you ever saw, and just full of all kinds of energy and stuff. And then this doctor operated on me and botched the job, and a piece of the tonsil went into my lung and made a huge lung abscess in there, which they, of course, didn't discover. And immediately I went down like a punctured balloon, and I caught everything that came along, and Suddenly I had three things. Was it three? Lung abscess, no, four. Lung abscess, double lobar pneumonia, whooping cough, and measles all at once. Well, the doctor, another doctor, came in to see me on Christmas Eve, checked out my vital signs and said to my mother, "My dear, forget it. He's going to be dead by morning. There's nothing we can do." Well, we had a housekeeper, and the housekeeper was the member of a little fundamentalist Wesleyan Methodist church. And she went and rousted all of her friends out of bed, and on Christmas Eve they went down to the Wesleyan Methodist church and prayed all night for me on Christmas Eve. And something happened. Sometime in the middle of that night, when my temperature was about 106, I died. And it was classical. You don't forget that there was a tunnel, and the light reflected off the ribs in the tunnel. I could still see that. And there was this tremendous, brilliant light down the end of the tunnel, and here I was going, wow, let me go up there. And as I approached the light, a voice came and said, "Go back, it isn't time." And I didn't want to go back. She said, I wanted to go there. It was wonderful. But reluctantly, being an obedient child, I turned and went back. And the next morning, my mother came into the room, and there I was sitting up asking for something to eat. And no one could believe it, the doctor least of all. It took me another 7 years to really recover. 2 years later, I coughed up the lung abscess, and then I really started to heal. The doctors never did help, but something did. And that event, when I was 5 years old, of experiencing death, has been the guiding star of my existence from that day forward. It's the reason why I never wanted to do anything would be involved with that. Once you've been touched by that, you just don't get away. And I know perfectly well that, it lies in everyone to experience it. So when I say it to you, it's not a theory to me. I have memories to back it up. It's my encounter with the world of the Magi and mysterious stars. Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Father, what is that connection with Arthur and Jesus and Merlin?
Well, if you read Shakespeare, the play you ought to start with to answer that question is Cymbeline. Now, if you read Cymbeline, you find that Cymbeline is the king of Albany. Albion? The form of Albion that we are associated with is Albany. It refers to the white cliffs of Dover and the white chalk southern parts of England. And Albany is the eastern part of England, and Cornwall is the western part of England. And in that story, the dukes of Albion and Cornwall are always in this struggle. The Celts are always fighting each other. And you'll find out that this king has two sons. One of them is called Arviragus. And Arviragus is the real name Arthur. And this Arviragus, in history, is Arviragus Caractacus. Caractacus, the High King. And we have great volumes of records about Arviragus Caractacus written by no one more reputable than Tacitus, who was one of the first writers of history and very famous to anyone who has ever read Latin. And Tacitus gives us huge volumes of information about Arviragus Caractacus. And he was a very remarkable person. First of all, the time of Cymbeline and Arviragus Caractacus is identical with the birth of Jesus. Same time exactly. And it is during the conquest of Rome, or, it's about within 50 years there. Caligula is the definitive conqueror of Britain, not Caesar. Caesar's expedition succeeded to some degree, But they rebelled, and Caligula had to go back and make it stick. And when this conquest came, it describes all the battles, the 12 battles. Now, in the stories of Arthur, you have all these 12 battles which Arthur won. That is a nice version of losing, because in every one of those battles, Arthur lost. You have a story in the Arthurian legends of Arthur conquering Rome. Rather, he was carried off as a prisoner to Rome. But when he was carried off as a prisoner to Rome, something very curious happened. He did conquer Rome in a curious way. Arviragus Caractacus, as a Celtic king, was taken before the Roman Senate. And they always dragged them through the streets, and humiliated them and said what wonderful people they were, and then let them die in a prison somewhere. But with Arviragus Caractacus, they didn't do that. Arviragus Caractacus was taken before the Senate of Rome and gave a speech there, which Tacitus records in every detail. And the Roman Senate was so impressed by the speech of Caractacus that they gave him a villa and let him retire in luxury in Rome. And he stayed there for several years, and eventually was released to go back and rule Britain in the name of Rome, which is the real story of Camelot. Now, when he went back, while he was in Rome, by the way, guess who came to town? The apostles, Peter and Paul. And all the early Christians resorted to the Casa Britannicum, which was the house of Arviragus. And that is recorded in the Martyrology of the Roman Catholic Church. It was the house of Arthur in Rome, which was the major meeting place of the early Christian church recorded in the book of Acts. Now, this Arviragus Caractacus was then sent back to rule Britain, and ruled Britain in great peace and wonder for many years. You notice that there aren't any Saxons in this story. And all the stories we hear, we get Saxons. The reason there aren't any Saxons in the story is there weren't any Saxons at that time. There were Romans instead. And Arthur's wars are not against Saxons, but against Romans. And if you read the story carefully, you'll see that that's the case. We got it mixed up a little bit because, of course, with the Saxons who came later, looking backward, we saw that conflict with the Celts and the Saxons before we saw the one behind it, which was the one between the Celts and the Romans. Arviragus Caractacus is Arthurus, the king, the once and future king, the one who, when he went back to England to rule in the name of Rome, brought his Christian friends with him. Merlin is the magician, the druid of the court of Cymbeline, who raised Arthur. And it is Merlin who established the union between the ancient Celtic ways and Christianity, which are the basis of the Cultic Church. There's the reason why we sing fa la 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 la, you know. All these ancient Celtic Christmases come to fruition through the Genesis of Arthur. Yes?
What, going back to what you answered your original topic, what we say is the nature of the challenges of personal starting. Is it an individual trip, or is it something that we must do together?
Basically, it's an individual trip. But, as the Magi, the confirmation comes when you do it together. Because it takes one to know one. You know the old story? And once you have gotten into that trip, you begin to have some kind of real relationship with other people who are into that trip. And did you see that star too? Because when you see that star and get into the quest of that star, suddenly there is a dimension to it which is like the divinity that is beyond it. Loving one another is involved in loving one another because we're all really involved in that trip together. But You have to do it yourself first. That's the mistake that is made by the ecclesial establishments, thinking that you can establish a society among people who aren't doing that themselves. In the final analysis, a society made up of people who aren't doing it individually is a flop. You have to do it yourself first, and then you can appreciate the value of when other people do it. Essentially, it's individual.
That's good psychology.
Yeah.
It occurs to me that the beginning has to be made more than once.
That's right. Because the window opens and it closes. You know? There are flashes of this epiphany. It opens inside and all of a sudden, there it is. I'll never forget. Closes and you forget. Oh, as it says somewhere in the scripture, you know what we're like? We're like a person who goes and looks at their face in the mirror and then goes away and forgets what they look like. And that's exactly the description of finding the divinity in the window within. You look at it and you say, there it is. Wow, I'll never forget. And then you immediately go away and forget. We're all little children. And little children are surely like that, aren't they? Oh, well, I've got it all. And then all of a sudden it's completely gone. Oh, did I see that?
Would that be true if you had that life-death experience?
Less so. The life-death experience tends to lock it in. But they forget too. I remember when I asked a man that recently who experienced that. He died while mowing the lawn and was dead for 8 hours clinically, and then mysteriously came back to life, and they sent him home. And he sat in his bed, and I went over, and his wife was there next to him, rather disturbed by all of this, and he was sitting there smiling, looking around, you know. And I said, how does it feel to be back? It's the first thing I said to him. He said, oh, it's okay. But I liked it over there, too. Yes.
Charlie, this thing about names and the law,
Mm-hmm.
and names and banks, it reminds me of the story about the Sufis who went into a bank to cash a check, and the bank officer said, can you identify yourself? And he took a mirror out and he looked at it and he says, yeah, it's me, all right.
Oh, that's marvelous. I thought, up with that, Sufi wisdom, you know.
Father,
The Sufi are...
let's hold on just a moment. I'd like to make an announcement. You know...
Now, Mary?
As long as another